Atlanta, March 5, 2015, Delta Flight 1086 is preparing to depart Atlanta to New York's LaGuardia Airport. The captain of the flight has been flying the ND-88 for over a decade and has accumulated over 11,000 hours on the type. The captain will fly this leg as the weather reported in LaGuardia is subpar. The first officer has accumulated over 2,000 hours on type and has a total of 11,000 hours. Both crew members are experienced flight crew and are considered up to current standards. Pushback from Atlanta occurred at 9:24 a.m. with 127 passengers on board. The weather reports for LaGuardia were as follows: wind 330 degrees at 12 knots, visibility half a mile in moderate snow and mist, ceilings broken at 700 feet above ground level. Snow accumulation was expected to be about 4 to 7 inches by noon. (9:54 Eastern Standard Time) in cruise flight at an altitude of 33,000 feet, the flight crew began discussing the initial approach into LGA. The captain asked the first officer to contact the dispatcher to see what the field condition report said. The crew started discussing braking action on the runway. The crew is discussing the use of flaps 40 with 130,000 pounds of weight and medium to fair braking. Maximum manual braking and max auto brakes would require 7,800 or 7,200 feet of runway, respectively, under medium braking conditions. LGA runway 13 is only 7,003 feet. The crew is convinced that a report of fair braking could not be used safely. They consulted the landing distances for flaps 40 with good braking using maximum auto brakes. They came up with a final number of 6,900 feet under good braking. 10:24 EST, holding instructions were given due to snow removal activity in LGA. The captain expressed disappointment from the dispatcher. At 10:37, ATC cleared Delta 1068 to LaGuardia without holding as snow removal operations were nearly complete. At this point, the crew were trying to obtain a braking action report from other aircraft that were landing. The issue was no aircraft were landing as they just opened the runway again after the snow removal. Upon touchdown, the captain swiftly engaged reverse thrust, an aggressive maneuver used for decelerating the airplane during the landing roll. Reverse thrust settings, denoted as engine pressure ratio (EPR) values, represent the engine power ratio of exhaust gas pressure to the incoming air pressure. Both pilots were aware that the designated setting for contaminated runways was 1.3 EPR. While the reverse thrust EPR rapidly ascended, the captain's attention was divided between steering the aircraft to counteract a leftward slide and ensuring the deployment of spoilers to engage the auto brakes. The left engine reached a maximum EPR of 2.07, while the right engine peaked at 1.91, both significantly surpassing the intended 1.3 EPR. These elevated EPR values were likely influenced by the captain's stress, the forceful reverse thrust input, and operational distractions, such as the persistent leftward slide despite the captain's efforts to steer clear of snowbanks adjacent to the runway. Consequently, these factors impeded the captain's close monitoring of EPR indications. The high EPR values led to rudder blanking, a phenomenon on MD-80 series airplanes caused by disrupted airflow over the rudder due to intense reverse thrust. This disruption, in turn, resulted in a loss of aerodynamic directional control. Despite retracting the thrust reversers and implementing significant corrective actions such as applying right rudder, right nosewheel steering, and manual braking, the aircraft's deviation from the left side of the runway became unavoidable, as the recovery of directional control came too late to be effective.
Let me introduce myself first if you don't know my background or who I am or anything about me. My name is Jason. I'm a safety professional for at least close to 2 decades now. I've been studying aircraft accidents all of my life and actually worked with the NTSB and for the NTSB in the beginning part of my career. So I would like to just talk about this Delta 1086, and the reason why we're doing this is really to prevent it from happening again. Delta 1086 is an MD-88 taken off out of Atlanta, and it was going from Atlanta to LaGuardia, and in LaGuardia it was really bad. LaGuardia weather, 8:51 Eastern Standard. This was right before pushback, about 30 minutes before pushback, okay, out of Atlanta. All runways were wet, sanded, and chemically treated. You had a quarter-mile visibility in snow and freezing fog, so nasty weather here in New York, which the pilots would have known by by then that LaGuardia was experiencing, they were experiencing some inclement weather. The crew started discussing the approach into LaGuardia about 40 minutes into the flight. So after pushback, the thing took off. They climbed out no problem. They just were starting to get to cruise, and they started talking about it. Now, this is about an hour and 30-minute flight, give or take. So, 40 minutes into it, they're starting to discuss the issues in LaGuardia already. And that's a good thing. You want your crew, whoever flying the airplane, is to start discussing that information and start planning, because you never want to be surprised by anything. So if you can plan early in the flight, the better. All of you know when you drive a car and you slam on the brake in icy conditions, you can slide and skid and all that stuff. And the roads can be very treacherous sometimes. Okay. Well, that's going 20 miles an hour. Now, what if we go at 150 miles an hour, right? So a little bit different, okay? So you're a whole different dynamic when you're going 150 miles an hour. Things change, right? And you need to have traction to the roadway. In this case, you need to have traction on the runway. When a pilot lands on a runway, they should report back to the air traffic control what it was. Was it poor, medium, or good? LaGuardia on a good day is challenging. It's one of those runways where you really can't screw up too much on the land. You can't float too much on this airport because you've got to have that stopping distance. The winds were 020, I believe it, like 4 or 9 knots, right around there. So it's favoring runway 4. You always want to take off and land into the wind if you can get it. 13 is kind of a quartering tailwind on landing here, which is going to impact landing distance. Another thing I have highlighted, if you take a look at this is from the chart. Now, pilots in the room, I want you to look. This is landing distance beyond threshold. A lot of pilots look at this runway and they go, oh, we got 7,000 feet to land. That is not the case, folks. That's 7,000 feet right there. You've got to flare the aircraft or arrest the descent. You got to slow the aircraft down to VREF, and then you got to land. Now, VREF is basically a target speed we want to touch down at. That's what VREF means. So 6,058 feet. That is what you have after the 1,000-foot point, somewhere around here. The flight crew at this point was discussing, and basically the entire cruise portion, where they were talking about what runway braking do we have. There was confusion at the time because they were clearing the runway. They were plowing the runway. They were sweeping the runway. So they had to close the runway. And when they closed the runway, it had put everybody in a hold. So you had a little bit of disconnect there with the flight crew and the dispatcher. They were told to hold at Robbinsville VOR, which is just south of, I think it's probably in the New Jersey area. Anyway, that helps to add a little bit of stress into the flight crew here. They started talking about landing distances. They landed 130,000 pounds. That's where they're planning. So we're going to go to the right, and we're going to use the column. You can see over here, you've got medium braking, poor braking. Okay, so let's go 130. We just had a report of poor. We go straight across. This is max auto brake. You have 9,900 feet. Remember, LaGuardia is pushing 7,000 feet, or 6,000 in our case. Now, at 9,900 feet, we're going to come down to this next column here and take a look at this. They're at altitude of 0 feet, which means the airport elevation is pretty much at 0. So we have to knock off 400 feet from that, which helps. And then what? They have to add winds. They got tailwinds and stuff like that. So you're looking at another addition of 300 feet per knot of tailwind, folks, over here. Well, they're over, they're way at about 10,000 feet total landing distance. That's why you heard the captain say, we can't land with poor. There's no way. We don't have enough runway. When you use max manual braking on the MD-80, it's 3,000 PSI right away to those brakes. Okay, so auto braking is a little less pressure. So you use auto brakes to actually help you start slowing down, and then when you get the airplane ready, configured for the landing, you touch down, the spoilers are out, the reversers are out, then you apply your manual brakes. All right, and you can push more brake pressure into the calipers, if you will. But in this particular case, the captain was not comfortable with max manual braking because it wasn't trained with. They didn't train that in the simulator, so they didn't really want to do it, which is a very smart thing. The captain right away knows we don't have enough real estate. I mean, he knows already, like, we're going to have an issue. I've got to plant this thing way before the 1,000-foot zone. Now, take in consideration this, and this is what we're going to have to look at next. Reverse idle by 60 knots. Okay? So at 60 knots, pull it out. All other distances includes the use of 1.3 EPR reverse thrust reduced to reverse idle by 60 knots. Touchdown speeds VREF 40 with 5 knots. Okay? And then take in consideration this. The data is advisory and includes a 15% safety margin and up to 1,500 feet air distance from the threshold to touchdown. So the captain knows, okay, wait, that's given us a 15% margin plus 1,500 feet. Well, what if we can land before that 1,500 foot mark, right? It's going to give us more real estate. And if we can do it here, we definitely can do it if we do that. Does that make sense? So he's thinking, okay, we have 6,800 feet total of runway after we calculate it all out. Okay, we could do that if we land prior to 1,500 foot mark. Does that make sense? We'll have enough runway. Sometimes, folks, in the real world, you've got to do things like that to give you the best chance of survival here, the best chance to stop the aircraft. That's called a smart captain who understands his or her aircraft. Braking reports were good. Now, the captain comes in and actually nails this, folks. He nailed it. And what I mean by that is he put it right where he needed to, right about the 515 feet maybe mark. That's perfect. Remember I said they calculated for 1,500. Well, this is 1,000 feet here. 1,500's here. So anything you can do in this is gravy. That's all positive space for you. He touched down perfect. As he comes in, he pulls reverse thrust. On the MD-80, they're reversers. Okay, they're called clamshells. And just like it sounds, when I pull reversers, it basically diverts the air like that. And then it throws the air on both sides. You can see it from the side view, just like that. They're going to pull what we call EPR, or engine pressure ratio. It basically measures thrust, air in to air out. They're trying to hit a certain EPR. And in this particular case, if you remember the last chart, we have to land and we have to pull 1.3 EPR and no more than that on landing, okay, in contaminated conditions. 1.6 during beautiful dry conditions, okay? So what reverse thrust does, it stops and helps you slow down, and then very effective, by the way, in higher speeds. Now, in this particular aircraft, there's a little gremlin on there, and we're going to get into that. If you pull more than 1.3 EPR on a contaminated surface, you run the risk of losing directional control. When you pull a high reverse thrust, it's going to blank that rudder out, folks, because of the intense exhaust coming out of that clamshell. It just disrupts the airflow over the rudder. It's not laminar anymore. It's all disrupted. So it blanks the rudder. Means that you slam on the rudder pedal, the plane's not going anywhere. It's not going to move. Well, the left EPR, 2.07 was the maximum EPR registered on this one. The right engine, 1.91 EPR on the right engine. Do I blame the flight crew about this? And the answer is no. And we're going to talk about this. But they knew, I know what you're saying. Wait a minute. They knew it was 1.3, and I totally understand that. But I'm going to tell you, move your hand an inch up. That's what I'm going to say to you. I want to move your hand an inch up. What does that look like? I bet you some of you are going to go an inch, some are going to go a quarter, some are going to go 4 inches. You see what I'm saying? It's by feel. You can't In a high-stress situation like this, you cannot expect a human to perform to those standards. It's just not doable. It's not going to work because you're so concentrating on actually stopping the airplane. We have, on November 5th of 2002, Boeing issued a flight operations bulletin. I'm not going to get into the bulletin, but it says basically this: thrust reversers, EPR control. According to Boeing, the bulletin reiterated the information in the company's MD-80 flight manual, basically about rudder blanking. Due to the geometry of the MD-80 thrust reversers, where they're located, right, the exhaust gas pattern will, at certain rollout speeds and EPR settings, interfere with the free stream airflow. Remember I was talking about that laminar airflow over the rudder. It's going to result in partial rudder blanking. Let's talk about the probable cause here. I'm going to get into kind of my thoughts on this one. Now, before I get into the probable cause, folks, you have to understand what the NTSB's mandate is. Their mandate is to investigate all accidents and determine the probable cause. And what the probable cause means, what happened? Probable cause of this accident was the captain's inability to maintain directional control of the airplane due to his application of his excessive reverse thrust, which degraded the effectiveness of the rudder in controlling the airplane's heading. Contributing to the accident were the captain's 1, situational stress, resulting from his concern about stopping performance, and number 2, attention limitations due to the high workload during the landing, which prevented him from immediately recognizing the use of reverse thrust, the excessive reverse thrust. So understand that the probable cause here has to be issued. Why did the airplane go off the end of the runway, or why did the airplane veer off the runway? Well, the captain lost directional control of the aircraft. That's their probable cause, right? That's what happened. That's why it exited out. Now, is that the only reason? Is that the only factor? No, there's multiple factors on why or how this thing happened. But that's the NTSB's probable cause. We have situational stress here from stopping performance. Again, it's a high stress situation with the captain. He knows he's got to stick the landing. He knows all of that. He knows he's got to get on reverse thrust as quick as he possibly can. Attention and limitations. Again, he was locked in. Once the aircraft started steering off, or veering off the end of the runway, or not end, but off the side of the runway, he locked up. You know, folks, put yourself in the flight deck crew, or put yourself in the captain's seat. If I was doing this flight as well, we have bad conditions in LaGuardia. We have aircraft that landed before me, 2 of which reported good. We have good margins. I would say good margins. We have positive margins, right? We know if we stick the landing, we could possibly, we'll be able to stop the aircraft, okay? It's going to take everything we have, and the margin of error is definitely, window of error is definitely slim and small, all right? We know the runway was contaminated with snow. Runway friction was sufficient for stopping. They did multiple simulations on this and were able to stop the aircraft. Flushing Bay at the end of runway 13 and stopping margins promoted aggressive input on the reversers. Like I was talking about before, you slap a human in the seat and say, okay, reverse thrust is going to help you, but don't pull too much because it might not help you. Rudder blanking caused a loss of directional control, which we knew that. The FO identified the high reverse thrust too late to be effective, right? So the FO is kind of telling them 3 times, take it out of reverse, take it out of reverse. By that time, the airplane's going off of the side of the runway. The captain's got slamming right rudder, slamming the steering wheel, the tiller, I should say, hard right, and he's doing everything possibly can to get the airplane going right and not left. This accident demonstrates continuing need for objective real-time airplane-derived data about runway braking. This is a recommendation. The ability for flight crews preparing to land with runway surface conditions that are worse than bare and dry. Here's another one. By not using its continuous friction measuring equipment during winter operations, LaGuardia Airport did not take advantage of a tool that would allow the airport to objectively assess the effectiveness of the snow removal operations on contaminated runways. Here's another little tidbit. When they popped out of the clouds, okay, they popped out about 200 feet, which is close to the runway, folks. That's 200 feet is not a lot of time to go, huh, to react, okay? So in 200 feet, they pop out, they look, and they go, holy crap, it's covered in snow. They weren't expecting that. The crew they weren't expecting bare runway, but they certainly weren't expecting a snow-packed runway. So what the NTSB is saying here is that, if LaGuardia Airport did take advantage of the measuring equipment or the frictional component of their machine, that would have aided the braking action reports. Here's some recommendations to the FAA from the NTSB. They require call-outs when reverse thrust exceeds 1.3 EPR. That's a really good thing. Develop equipment and procedures to calculate, record, and convey braking ability required and or available to slow or stop the aircraft. Very good, right? Then number 3, they had a ton of findings or recommendations. I've just pulled a few that were kind of applicable to this. Work with operators and the system manufacturers to develop procedures that ensure that airplane-based braking ability results can be readily conveyed to and easily interpreted by arriving flight crews, airport operators, and air traffic control personnel, and others with a safety need for this information. So something needs to be had that can make braking easy to decipher. And the last one here, provide precise guidance for the need to issue NOTAMs in a timely manner, which is notices to air missions now. And 2, changes to runway surface conditions that would prompt the issuance of an updated NOTAM. So what a NOTAM is, folks, is that if an airport is closed or a runway is closed or something's under construction, they'll send this NOTAM and it goes out throughout the whole system, and a pilot will get a release is called with a ton of NOTAMs in it, right? And you've got to look at all those NOTAMs and go, oh, okay, this light's not standard, this marking's out, or there's so many NOTAMs that could get overwhelming sometimes, right? That's what they're talking about here. We should be able to issue NOTAMs quicker. Let's talk about recommendations to the Port Authority. Use continuous friction measuring equipment used during winter operations and ensure that this information is included in the snow and ice control plan. Now, I know what you're going to ask me. Was the crew fired? And the answer is no, they weren't. Now, very interesting. A lot of you are going to go, oh, why weren't they fired, right? They took an airplane off the runway. Well, I'm going to tell you why. 44% of the MD-80 fleet in Delta exceeded 1.6 EPR on a dry runway. 44% of the fleet. Okay? That's not an anomaly. That's not a one-off. That's everybody's doing it. Remember why. Remember what I told you why that happens. Go ahead and pull one knob with. Tell me what that feels like. That's not going to be, it's not even attainable. You can't expect a human to do that. It's just not going to work. You might get some, you might not. It's just, it's dumb, right? It just doesn't make sense. All right, look at this one. 14 Delta reviewed, the NTSB reviewed 14 Delta flights from MD-80 landings on wet runways. All exceeded, not some, all exceeded 1.3 EPR. And half of those exceeded 1.6, at least on one engine. Once again, folks, okay, what are we saying here, right? Include landing EPR of 1.3 into the approach briefing, and that's what should have happened. Could this crew have done anything to help mitigate this threat? And the answer is, of course, okay, and we're going to just talk about, and this is not going against the flight crew at all, but think about this. Planning prevents accidents. Good planning prevents accidents. If we could plan before anything like this happens, okay, try to anticipate all of our threats, then we mitigate risk, okay, and that planning comes from everyone, the whole operation. What we should do here is a good briefing, and we have to anticipate a hold. We have to anticipate the airport closing. We have to just anticipate that and say, hey, we're going to LaGuardia today. It's snowing, okay? The weather is not optimal. will expect to hold. And actually we're going to expect to go to our alternate. Okay, because we have to have an alternate airport. So just expect us not even going to LaGuardia today. If we get there, fine, we're lucky. If we don't get there, no problem, we'll go right to our alternate. Okay, I know it's easier to say that, but there's actually external pressures on flight crews, folks, to get to their destination. Okay, passengers have to go to LaGuardia. They pay to go to LaGuardia, not somewhere else. Okay, so you have external pressures as well pushing the flight crew. Not telling them that, it's kind of the system is built that way to say, okay, we've got to go to LaGuardia. Now, they could have bugged out and said, you know what, I'm not going in there. We're going to go to our alternate or whatever. But anticipate that. If I was in the captain's shoes, would I have done the same thing? Of course. I have 2 aircraft before me saying we've got good braking. Of course we're flying. Of course we're going to go. Of course I'm going to land. Do the same thing. I'm going to do the same thing. Okay? I won't do anything different. Again, one of the things, the threats we could have talked about is that 1.3 EPR. Now, hindsight's 2020. Okay, so it's easier to say that now, but when that bulletin came out in 2002, that should have been all of the MD-80 brief. It should have been on there. Which what I'm saying is, okay, folks, this has a mandatory briefing item. 1.6 dry, 1.3 wet or contaminated. FO or whoever the pilot monitoring is, that's your job. Your job is to call what the EPR setting is when we land. That would have helped mitigate and maintain directional control. Now, I will say this. I think this captain saved everybody's life on this. After reviewing this accident, this could have been devastating, okay? LaGuardia is known for this kind of stuff. This is not the first time LaGuardia has claimed an aircraft. The airport is known for this. It is one of those I'll get your booty type deals. Gosh, I probably can count 4 or 5 on my hand right now on how many airplanes have succumbed to LaGuardia. So this is what I think. Now go with me on this. Just kind of take a ride with me for a minute. The captain touched down here, okay? We exited the runway about 110 knots, give or take, and decelerating from this point, right about there. Okay. Now what if I added 500 feet to this, which is somewhere around here? This airplane would have probably had enough energy to go over. Because of this, the flight crew had to guess, before this accident, the flight crew had to guess what was the braking action. The pilot mentioned it 4 or 5 times. What's the braking action? What's the braking? On the voice recorder, he said about 4 or 5 times. Well, today it's automatic. Anything below or anything other than dry gets braking reports. Touchdown, midpoint, rollout. Every time it's in the NOTAMs and the notices to errors missions, and it's in the METAR or the ATIS, I would say, which is the Automated Terminal Information Service. It's basically automated weather. We'll hear that weather report and we'll know braking action is reported as 555. That means it's good. Okay, you'll never have to question yourself, what's the braking action? So hopefully you got something out of this. Do me a favor, smash that subscribe button if we provided value to you today, and also hit the bell notification. This way, when a new video comes out, you can check it out. Now, normally we stream every week on Flight Sim. We have a lot of fun flying on the simulator, and I enjoy that as well. But this is kind of what we do. Safety professional. So if you like this, please comment below on if there's any other things you'd like me to showcase and dive in for you. We can do it. Okay. The best part about this, folks, is there was no fatalities. Minor injuries, great. So it's a silver lining for everyone. Kudos to the flight crew. Kudos to the captain for actually putting the airplane down where it needed to be put down.